Greetings, family. Welcome to another wonderful, infiltrating, edutating edition of We All Be Radio, news, TV, news-free Dixie for the 21st century. I'm your host for this empowerment segment, as usual, Brother Ron. We got a special one for you all today, because today, or this week rather, this is the second day of the 2021 Jimmy Lunsford Jamboree Festival week. It's the second day. Number 2 out of 8. And we are celebrating the legacy of the one and only James Melvin Lunsford, who was the king of swing. He was the real king of swing, 30s and 40s swing. Not Benny Goodman, not R.T. Shaw, not Paul Whiteman, but James Melvin Lunsford from Fulton, Mississippi, by the way of Denver, Colorado, and also a great stop in Memphis, Tennessee, that city of good abode, where he is credited with being the first jazz educator. He's the first person to teach jazz studies in a formal educational setting. The number one, took his best high school students, formed him a music band. He was not hired to be a music instructor or band leader at Manassas back in the 20s, but he was hired to be like a gym teacher, coach, I guess language teacher, history teacher, depends on the source. But he took his best music students, which formed the nucleus of arguably the greatest swing band of all time. Jimmy Lunsford Orchestra became the house band in the Cotton Club back in 1934 after Cab Calloway and Duke Ellington. His orchestra was the number one attraction at the Apollo Theater for a whole decade. He was the number one band of choice for Black Americans in America, hence the nickname the Harlem Express. Like, he was that popular. And he was bigger than Duke Ellington and Count Basie, one of his contemporaries, the great swing leader, Glenn Miller, who was a white man. If Glenn Miller's Larry Bird, then Jimmy Lunsford's Magic Johnson. But Glenn Miller said that Duke is great, Basie is remarkable, but Lunsford tops them both. There was no show like Lunsford's. Greatest show on earth, to use a sports term, presentation, comedy, choreography, great execution, sound, a famous two-beat sound, the Lunsford sound. Fess Waller, the legendary Ain't Misbehaving, Mr. Ain't Misbehaving, said that Jimmy Lunsford was the king of syncopation. So what I love about Jimmy Lunsford, why we should talk about him and others like him, is that he never got too big for his people or his britches. Whenever he used to sell out the auditorium, what they call Beale Street Auditorium, Church Auditorium, he will come back to Manassas High School, his old stomping grounds, and he will give free concerts and musician clinics for the kids there. Matter of fact, he would give money out of his own pocket to start music education programs throughout the country to help Black kids stay out of trouble, and as a way of rites of passage to help children become adults. So he was that type of thinker. He actually majored in social work at Fisk University. And when around the time he died at the young age of 45, he was looking to buy real estate to invest in to start a retirement community for Black musicians. So he was very much about the village mindset, each one teach one, brothers keeper, looking out for everybody. But unfortunately, back on July 12th, 1947, Jimmy Lunsford dropped dead in a music store right before a concert. His gig was next door in Seaside, Oregon. They said it was a heart attack, but a lot of people believe he was poisoned by a racist restaurant owner who did not want to serve Black people. So he died at 45, right before his last gig. Thousands of people came to his funeral down in Memphis, and he's buried in Elmwood Cemetery off of Crump Boulevard ever since July 1947. And also, he was an aviation pioneer. Jimmy Lunsford owned and flew his own plane. This is at a time when Black folks were not trying to teach Black folks how to fly planes in America. If you know, this is the 80th anniversary coming up on Pearl Harbor, which happened December 7th, 1941, which got America involved in World War II. A lot of us may not know that the guy who was the so-called mastermind behind the Pearl Harbor attack, Emo Yamamoto, went to Harvard University. He went to Harvard University, and America taught him how to fly airplanes. So America trains its terrorists, but it won't train its citizens to defend her. So it's interesting. America, America. But anyway, so we're starting, we've been doing the Jimmy Lunsford Jimmy Festival Week since 2017. I've been involved in promoting the amazing rich legacy of Jimmy Lunsford since 2007. So we do a whole week of activities, online and off, try to engage the community, individuals, grassroots, as well as institutions. It's all about the beloved village concept. So I just want to introduce this man, this phenomenal black man who is from the city of Good Abode. So that's Memphis' official nickname, the city of Good Abode, right? Where they kill dreamers and whatnot. But this brother right here named Brother John B. Smith, he's a righteous elder. He's an author. He just wrote a book called The 400, From Slavery to Hip Hop. I just got mine finally. It arrived at the Advanced Auto Parts near me. Because they say they missed me on Saturday, but they ain't tried to get in to get my, it's another story. But he got this 950-page book. Y'all talking about critical race theory. This guy's a critical race thinker. He got this 950-page book about the true history of our people, how hip-hop really started, the roots of hip-hop, and also the roots of our pain and struggle. This guy was a co-founder of the Memphis Invaders. That's our version of the Black Panther Party, I guess. They just had their anniversary observance this month. I think Black Panther Party for self-defense will start, I believe, October 15th, 1966, if I'm not mistaken. That brother, I think, can correct me. But these guys was going to help Dr. King with the Poor People campaign. Matter of fact, they were actually staying at the Lorraine just an hour before Dr. King was killed, shot in the face. I'm actually right across the street from Lorraine right now, so I wake up with that on my mind every day. But John B. Smith is an amazing man. I always say Black history is stranger than science fiction, and it's better than a Hollywood movie. And we got somebody who not only wrote about what went on, he actually walked the walk, he lived it, he breathed it, and he's still going on strong. The marathon continues. Boys and girls, scholars, laymen, I'll give you the one and only Brother John Smith. How you doing?
Excellent this morning. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm sorry for I thought Mercury retrograde was over, man. I was a nightmare. Everything messed. I'm late for everything. Everything arriving late books. But how you doing? It's good to see you.
I'm doing excellent, and you're never late because you arrive on time.
Yeah, arrive on time. Yes, sir. But I want to tell people, man, I was amazed. I know about the Memphis Invaders. I know some of the Invaders, but I remember a couple weeks ago you was at Cam Mackenzie's birthday party, and you started speaking, man. You knew how to move the crowd. You like an MC, man. You just people was gravitating towards you. I was spellbound by the things you were saying, and you sound so authentic and true and honest. And you had that book. I said, I gotta have it. You had this almost 1,000-page book in your hand. I said, I gotta have me a copy. I don't know what exactly was in the book, but it gotta be something I need. Maybe some medicine.
Right. It's good to have the opportunity. I just like to show people what you're talking about. This is the 400 here, and it took me 6 years to really compile it. But I've been working on it almost ever since I became an invader in 1967. So the whole idea for me behind writing the 400 was to create a narrative for young people. I wrote this for high schoolers and college students. Even though older people would read it, my aim was to give them a narrative that began before the transatlantic slave trade. So in order to understand how Europe became the economic power of the world, they had to understand Europe before the transatlantic slave trade. Because before the transatlantic slave trade, Europe was poor, dirt poor. And it was the Moors from Africa that invaded the Iberian Peninsula, which is Portugal and Spain, that brought knowledge, and wealth to Europe. They taught the Europeans not only to navigate, but they taught them to sail the oceans. Before they taught them navigation, Europeans didn't believe in a spherical world. They thought the world was flat. And if you sailed out in the ocean far enough, you would fall off the edge. So the Moors brought Europe into modern thinking. And it was from that they began to sail around the coast of Africa. And that's where the transatlantic slave trade began, and Europe began to build wealth. So I wanted to begin there in order to help people to understand slavery became the basis of wealth for the modern world. Without slavery, Europeans may still be living in poverty as they were before slavery. And when you get to slavery in America, you have the same story, just repeated and in a different way, because slavery in America gave America its modern day wealth. And I know today that's the argument about over CRT, that slavery ended when the slave trade ended in Europe, but it didn't. America, what they did was they outlawed the importation of slaves. That is, slaves could not be brought into America other than smuggling, which became a great industry in America. And if you've ever seen the movie Gone with the Wind, the lead character, Red Butler, he was a smuggler. And this guy was like a hero in the South because they continued to bring slaves into America as before the slave trade ended. But the thing America really does not want to admit is that in the 1820s, the internal slave trade became the way that Southerners in the South got slaves. And that trade began in the 1830s, even before the Civil War. You know, Americans began to breed slaves, and states like Virginia, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Kentucky, North Carolina, these are states that their major industry was breeding slaves, and they would sell the slaves to cotton producing states in what they call the Old South, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Texas. They imported slaves, and this went on until the Civil War ended it. So Americans today try and pretend that, oh, slavery was just this little thing that happened and that we didn't really do a lot of slavery, and that the so-called internal slave trade was like, you know, the master and the overseers messing around in the slave pens, you know, at night. But no, the internal slave trade created the middle class in the South for white people. Before the internal slave trade, there was only a very few jobs for white people. Most of it was overseers. You know, if you've seen the movie Django,
yes,
that movie, that was about the internal slave trade. That was the time of the internal slave trade. So, and in the movie, you see where when it comes on, they're moving slaves. They got a line of them walking, and these guys show up and take the slaves. That was because the guys that had the slave were robbers. They had raided slave plantation and taken their slaves. And that's why Django and his partner was riding through the South looking for white people who were slave raiders. So the 400 starts there, but it goes on into life after the slave trade. So I just wanted to give you that introduction so we could move from there forward with a better understanding.
I'll definitely thank you for that. I mean, I call it critical race thinking. People talking about theory, we need more critical race thinkers than anything else. So I just want to get about who was John B. Smith, how you get started. What's your origin story?
Well, I was born in Mississippi. I came from a family of sharecroppers. My mother and father, they escaped Mississippi under the cover of night because they had what you call slave catchers, which became the modern day police. They patrol the roads at night, and black people couldn't be out on the road unless they had a piece of paper where a white man had written a note telling them who they were and where they were going and who they belonged to in terms of whose land they lived on. So when you get people that were able to get out of Mississippi, they did it under the cover of night. So my father was drafted in World War II, and he had to come to Memphis for induction, but it was at the end of World War II. And so they had stopped, drafting black soldiers. And so he stayed in Memphis and came back to get us at night. And that was in 1948 for me. So I grew up, as most kids. I went to segregated schools, and I graduated from Carver High School in 1962, went to the military. I went to the Air Force. I served 4 years doing Vietnam. And when I got out, I came home. I was a good colored boy. I was raised to be a good colored boy. Say yes, sir, no, sir, all that good stuff. My mother, she's very religious. She's 101 today. She's still with us.
Oh, that's a blessing. Wow.
And yeah, definitely. But she insisted on me being a good young man, close haircut, dressed nice, all of that good stuff. So when I got out of the Air Force, I went to work at the Army Depot, and I was living up what you call a good life. Had a good job. I was driving a Volkswagen, had my own apartment. All of my high school friends, they came over to the house and we partied, and that kind of stuff. I wasn't thinking about civil rights or any of that. I was living the life of a good colored boy. It was life of a dream for me. And one night, I was going over to my apartment. My friend, his name was Charles Cabbage. We grew up in the same neighborhood. We went to the same school. We played football together. I played football, but he played football and basketball. And Charles, when we graduated, he had a scholarship to Morehouse. So he went to Morehouse when I went to the Air Force. And what was going on in Morehouse is what you were talking about earlier. Black Power had just started. Stokely Carmichael and Rep Brown, they were going to, I think Rep went to Southern and Stokely went to Morehouse. So Charles was down there when they were really putting the theory of Black Power together. It was not something written down. As a matter of fact, when Stokely first uttered the words Black Power on the way to Jackson, Mississippi during the James Meredith March Against Fear, that was the first anybody heard of it. And so young Black activists, mostly guys from SNCC and women, young women from SNCC, they were the ones that were trying to put together the theory of what Black Power really meant. So they were having what they call Black Power sleepovers. On weekends, students from all the other HBCUs would come to Atlanta, and because Atlanta had 4 schools, the Morris Brown, Clark, Spelman, and Morehouse, plus the University of Center. And so everybody would come down there and they would get together over the weekend. They'd meet in dorms and in houses, you know, where a student lived. And we talk about Black Power, what we were trying to do. The guys that really read about revolutionary theory, like Lerone Bennett's Before the Mayflower, Dr. Chancellor Williams, Destruction of Black Civilization, books like from Frantz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth. Those were the guys that really was setting the theory. And guys like me, we came just to hear what they were talking about because, like I said, I hadn't read any books. You know, I didn't know really anything other than, you know, Black history from the way in which Frederick Douglass talked about it.
Right.
So they brought the revolutionary ideas into our struggle for freedom. And the HBCUs they were like incubators, you know, because they grew us in terms of our knowledge about Black people and what we needed to do, how we needed to go about it. And while this was going on, you know, some were dancing, they playing music in the background, but the people who were developing the theories, they couldn't, you know, give us a whole book. So they had to figure out these little short phrases, quick ways to break the information down so we could take it to the street.
That's right.
And they call that your rap. See, and to be a Black Power advocate, you had to have a rap. You know, you had to be able to talk to people in the street in a way that they understood. So you had to be able to condense a lot of this knowledge. And the thing about why I tie the title of the 400 from slavery to hip hop is because a lot of these the students in the South going to HBCU were from up north. See, schools were segregated in the North. You might, 1 or 2 might get into a Harvard or a school like that, but most of them went to HBCUs. And a lot of these kids were from up north. When they went home, they took the same Black Power sleepovers up north. They started having the same kind of parties we were having down south, talking about the same thing, dancing. And this is why we call the major theme of hip hop is rap. See, so rap didn't actually start in the North. Rap started in the South. But because kids were from the North, they took it back home. And that's how, that was the beginning really of hip hop. And but that didn't happen until the late 80s, early 90s. But that's how that process took place.
So I mean, we getting it from like a primary source. You was there when everything went down, everything kind of converged. So you saying Atlanta? So you saying Atlanta and not New York City is the birthplace of hip hop?
It's the birthplace of rap, and rap is the foundation of hip hop. You know, I know I get all kind of arguments about people about that, but see, they cannot tell you where rap came from, where rap started. See, they just picked it up and started using it. Guys like DJ Kool Herc and Africa Bambaataa, they started the turntables and they got the big speakers, but the medium that they were communicating with people on came from the South, came from Atlanta. It was rap. So, we need to understand that our history is so dynamic that it's very difficult to say these people did this or these people did that. See, R&B came from blues, which started in the slave pens. Even before it became music. See, the slave masters took everything from us. And this is what most people don't understand about our history and what I'm trying to communicate in the 400. See, every other culture that's come to America, they came voluntarily, first of all. They were volunteers. Right. Second, when they came, they brought their culture with them. The Chinese, the Italians, the Irish, Indians, no matter where they came from, they brought their culture with them. They were able to maintain their culture. They had commonality when they came together, so they could build communities. They could build wealth based upon what they were doing in the country where they left. But see, our history is totally different. We were taken from Africa as individuals, from all along the west coast of Africa, from Mauritania all the way down to Namibia, So we were brought here as individuals. The only thing we had in common was skin color. And in those slave pens, because life was so drastic and brutal and desperate, the only way we could survive was to learn to communicate and work with each other. The next thing is we were not allowed to speak our language. Anything that was African, white people suppressed. Drums were the first thing they took away. Any kind of a ceremonial activity that Black people brought with them from Africa, they had to hide. See, our culture began in our heads because slaves had to keep that in their head. And we had to learn to communicate that to each other, but communicate it in a way that white people didn't understand. We were not allowed to speak the same language that white people spoke. If you tried to speak like a white person, you were considered uppity and you were punished. So the languages that we learned to speak, we created music first by just making rhythms, by beating on our they called it patent juba, where they made rhythms by hitting on their body. Then they started tapping on boards. They made instruments. The banjo, a Black man made the banjo. See, so blues was not a song. Blues was a way that slaves tried to anesthetize the pain they were experiencing. So those groans and hollers and moans became rhythms. Then they added words to that. So this is the origin of blues. And blues, it became the musical chants and things. Dance is the same way. If you picked your feet up off the floor, that was considered dancing. And dance was outlawed for slaves. So that's why we developed the shuffling out of our feet and the upper body torso movements and shaking as a form. That's what they had to do in the slave pen in their ceremonial dances and stuff. But the white man, the master, when he saw him doing that, he enjoyed it. It was entertainment for him, but it wasn't necessarily entertainment for the slave. They were trying to anesthetize their pain. But when he had a party for his family, or when people came down south to buy slave or to buy cotton and stuff or sell slaves, they would have ceremonies and he'd get the slaves to entertain them, to do the stuff that he liked them seeing. Some of those white guys that came down south, they were Irish. And see, the Irish got a culture where dance and music is very important. So they picked up on how entertaining the slaves were. These are the guys that went back up north, started putting black paint on their face, dressing in rags. And that's where they call it Minstrelsy, We just call it blackface. So blackface is the original American entertainment. All other entertainment in America was European based. Symphonies, operas, stage plays, that was European entertainment. But the blackface minstrelsy, that was done in dance halls. So we're really the base of American entertainment because we developed the first form of entertainment in America.
You know, I would think about Thomas Daddy Rice or T.D. Rice with the Jim Crow stuff, and even Stephen Foster, old Susanna. Yeah. All this stuff is our stuff.
He stole it.
It's like saying Eli Whitney actually invented the cotton gin. You know, Eli Whitney didn't invent that.
Yeah. You know, that's the nature of our culture. See, yeah. and CRT, that the big argument that's going on now, that's why they have that argument going on, because they've laid claim to all of this. And to teach the truth that I tell in the 400, it shows that they are thieves rather than inventors and great entrepreneurs. Most of what the white culture has taken advantage of is something that a black man, like the cotton gin, Eli Whitney, he stole that from why would a white man create a machine to make it easier for slaves? No, a slave would think of that.
That's right.
Right. So that's that's the kind of conversation I wanted to have with young descendants of slavery, so they would know that you have a lot to be proud of because you're the base of this culture, and hip hop is an international culture. It's not just here. Hip hop is the dominant culture in the world today. And so that's our culture. They are trying to be like us rather than we're trying to be like them. And it's because we don't understand that we look down at hip hop and we talk about the language and that kind of stuff. But that's irrelevant. They did the same thing with R&B. When the blues first came along, they downed that. And the people who go to Beale Street every day in Memphis, the white folks that come to Beale Street claiming the blues heritage, when it was being done, like you talk about Jimmy Longford's, white folks didn't come to Beale Street then. They did stuff that, country and western. The country and western is how WWII, the radio station, it was a country and western station until they went broke and came and found Nat D. And Nat D is the one that built WWII and helped build Black culture. And Beale Street is the heart of Black culture in Memphis.
You talking about like Nat D. Williams, the historian at Booker T. Washington High School, one of the first Black disc jockeys in the country. He was the first black DJ in the country, but he doesn't get credit for that. And he was a big fan of Jimmy Lunsford because he was trying to tell Black folks when Jimmy Lunsford was buried in Memphis, we got to rally around that and build something from that because, what I'm saying, like we forget our torch bearers, our standard bearers. We don't do a good job. And, it makes me think about us. We don't really think of ourselves too much of being a contribution or being an asset. Unless it's like making them money. It's like Black pain is white folks' entertainment and profit.
Yes, definitely. And as you asked earlier, how I got started in the activism of Black people, the invaders, when we began basically like you, working in the community, trying to do stuff that Black people needed. And it was because of the sanitation strike and Dr. King that really brought us together as a group and allowed us to make the kind of contribution that we made back then and that I continue in this day. And most people don't understand, they don't even know anything about the Invaders and Dr. King and why we came together.
That's why I want to talk to you, because I saw the Invaders documentary twice, and I thought it was well done. I mean, it was a great introductory to the Invaders. And like, you know, I'm glad to talk to you because some of the stuff you said at Cam's birthday party, they're not going to get in the traditional history books.
No.
They don't teach this. They never really taught Black history in school when I was coming up. No. I had to learn it from talking to people like you or just reading my own, just have my own reading thing, reading my grandma's encyclopedias or going to the school library and checking. They never taught anything about Black history in schools, really.
Well, like Dr. King, most people, all they know about Dr. King is he made the I Have a Dream speech in 1963. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. And, you know, he made the mountaintop speech and he was assassinated. Right. You know, but Dr. King was one of the greatest strategists. You know, a lot of Black men have been able to talk about the history, been able to write about the history. But Dr. King was one of these, our ancestors like Marcus Garvey. He had a vision and a plan that he was trying to implement. And he had to do that working with civil rights leaders who were not really interested in the poor, which is what Dr. King, he was interested in the poor. Right. And again, most of us don't think of civil rights the way the civil rights leaders, for them, civil rights was about getting good jobs, going to school with white children, living in white neighborhoods, and things like that. So, but Dr. King, he was a part of that, but his concern was about how to help the poor people, because he knew if the poor rise up, then anybody in the middle class is going to rise up. But the civil rights leaders themselves, they saw it as they had to get, you know, what the white people were willing to concede first, and then they would pass that on down to what the rest of the community. And Dr. King didn't see it that way. When he got involved in the sanitation strike, it was because he had in 1967, December, that was when he declared the Poor People's Campaign. And he went on the road, preaching in churches, trying to get the civil rights leaders to help him with it. But because he had come out against the war in Vietnam and was speaking against the war in Vietnam, J. Edgar Hoover and all the Southern conservatives, they attacked him. They came out against him because they were for the war, you know. And so he really didn't have any real allies except Reverend Hosea Williams, Reverend Abernathy, Reverend Orange. They were the ones that really supported him. Most of the rest of them, they wanted Dr. King to, once he got the Nobel Peace Prize, they wanted him to stop doing demonstrations and marches. They wanted him to become a spokesman for Black people and go talk to white people in the boardrooms and, you know, to raise money. And Reverend Williams and Reverend Abernathy, they wanted to have more marches. So that's what created this tension between Dr. King and the liberal whites and Blacks. So when the sanitation strike happened, that's why he got involved in that, because he said this was about poor people. And the sanitation workers, they were the poorest of the poor. They made $1.75 an hour. They couldn't use the locker room to change clothes after a day of work. And back then, they picked up the garbage in number 3 wash tubs. And those tubs get holes in them. And the sanitation workers had to buy those tubs. The city didn't buy the tube for them. They had to buy that tub out of their salaries. So they didn't want to just, tub get a hole in and get another one. They would patch them, how we figure out a way to make something go further than it would. So they would patch the tub, but it would still leak on them, the water and stuff from the garbage. So and when you were on the bus and a garbage worker got on the bus, everybody on the bus knew because he brought the smell with him because they could not go to the locker room and change clothes. The other thing is that during inclement weather, like rain, storm, like that, they would send the black workers home while the white workers would go sit in the locker room waiting on the weather to get better. This is why they developed the habit of getting in the back of the garbage truck out of the weather. And that's why the 2 guys that got killed were in the back of the garbage truck. They were trying to stay, because it was a storm that day. They were trying to stay on the clock so they could get a full day's pay. And the compactor started up mysteriously. Nobody's been able to explain that yet, why that compactor started up. But when they were killed, the city refused to give the family any kind of compensation. Loeb, who was the mayor at this time, gave each family $500. And he said that was to help them with the funeral.
Wow.
Not that the city, these are people who died on the job as a result of the city's malfunctioning equipment, but the city took no responsibility for it. So this is why when the garbage strike, that's why the strike started. And when it started, Loeb went to Chancery Court and got an injunction against the strike because their union, the city refused to recognize it. And the fight was over dues checkoff. That's how you pay your union dues, through by them taking your dues out of your check. The city refused to do that. So that meant the union was not recognized. And so anytime they had grievances, they had to come to the mayor and negotiate with the mayor as individual workers, not as a union. So they really had no recognized authority to do anything. And so they outlawed the union from even participating in the strike. And this is why they needed the community to come in and support them. And this is when the invaders got involved in the sanitation strike. And we were the ones that were doing the marches, having the rallies. And this is when I got involved with the invaders, and we started teaching the kids, the workers, when they had rallies at the Claiborne Temple, the children of the sanitation workers would come to the rally. So I started talking to them. Now, don't let the garbage truck just roll through your neighborhood and pick up garbage, because the mayor had a bunch of scabs to pick up garbage. And so I throw bricks at them, throw bottles at them, and run and hide. You know your neighborhood. You don't have to be afraid of the police. And so the mayor started signing the police cars to follow the garbage trucks during the day and to protect them. So I taught them to make Molotov cocktail. And we start at night, we throw fire. In the daytime, we throwing bricks and rocks at the garbage workers. And that's what really created pressure on the city to want to really end the strike.
Wow.
And Dr. King, they brought Dr. King to town because he was not able to. The COM, that's what they call the community organization, Community on the Move for Equality. They were not able to get the workers to go back to work, because I would get up in the meetings every night and tell them, "You're selling these people out, man. Don't go back to work." And they wouldn't go back to work. So when you were talking about Cam's birthday party out in North Memphis, that was the old Rubber Workers Union Hall.
Wow.
And so they had a meeting there so they could keep everyone that wasn't, only union members could come in. And so when they moved the meetings from Claiborne Temple to the Firestone Rubber Workers Union Hall, the workers came by my apartment, which was the headquarters for the invaders, told us what was happening, and took us out to the meeting at the Firestone Workers Union Hall. And they wouldn't let us in because they said only union workers could come into the meeting. So one of the guys said, "Hey, man, they got a side door. If y'all go around to the side door, I open the door and let y'all in." They had brought the president of the National AFSCME, Jerry Wirtz, to town to convince them to go back to work, because Loeb had agreed to give the union check off and collect dues, but he wouldn't negotiate their grievances, which was to use the showers, to be able to get sick pay, be able to have vacation pay, things like that. Everybody else had. The garbage workers couldn't get that. So when he started speaking, I did him like I did everybody else. You selling them out, man. You want them to go back to work and trust Loeb to do right when they're out on strike. Now, if they go back, they won't have any negotiation power. And so the workers voted to stay out. And that's why they brought Dr. King to town, to negotiate with the union. And they thought Dr. King was going to do what they wanted to do. But they started doing what the invaders were doing. And they were having rallies, and they were telling the people to get it out in front of the garbage trucks, not let them leave the barn and stuff like that. And Dr. King had he made a speech at Mason Temple where he declared March 28th a general strike. He asked Black people all over the city not to go to work, students not to go to school, and things like that. So, and we wasn't a part of that. The invaders, they would not even allow the invaders to go to meetings. So we started organizing students in the high school and in the colleges around Memphis to come to the march on March 28th. And when that march was so large that Art Gilliam, he's the head of the radio station WWII, WLOK, he estimated that march at 50,000 people. That was the largest march in the South. Nobody, not even Dr. King, had produced that many people in a single march. The largest march he had was the march from Selma to Montgomery, the Edmund Petty Bridge, when they beat the people. That was the largest march he had. So So when he saw all those people on Beale Street, he wanted to know, how did that happen? And Dr. Ernest Withers, the photographer, he was working with Dr. King taking pictures. So he told him that was the invaders. And Dr. King didn't know anything about the invaders. So he told him, you need to get in touch with the invader. And he said, well, I want to talk to him. And so he sent word to the Commercial Appeal to get there was a young man, he wanted to be a reporter. His name was Calvin Taylor. He was working as a copy boy for the Commercial Appeal. And Dr. King called and they put Calvin on the phone. And he told Calvin to come down to the Rivermont and bring the invaders because he wanted to meet with them. And so in that meeting, he told us he was going to leave town and come back on the 3rd, and he'd meet with us then. So when he came back, he met with us he met with the sanitation workers that night that he made the his mountaintop speech. The next day he met with us at the Lorraine, and he talked with us about what he was trying to do with the Poor People's Campaign. He wanted us to be a part of that. And we met with him. We were in room 315 and 316 at the Lorraine, and Dr. King was in room 306. And so we left our room, went down to his room, and talked with him about what we wanted as a group to be a part of the Poor People's Campaign. And so that's when he told us about what he was trying to do with the Poor People's Campaign, which most people don't know. See, Dr. King, when he first started, he was talking about taking 1 million people to Washington, D.C. And on the way to Washington, he wanted the other civil rights leaders and preachers to allow him to use their churches for where people could stop overnight, get food, rest up for a day or so, and then continue to march all the way to Washington, D.C. But when he saw that turnout in Memphis on Beale Street, he changed his strategy altogether. And he wanted us to help him with his new strategy. What he wanted us to do was to become marshals for him and get other Black Power groups. See, there were Black Power groups in every large city in America. And he wanted us to go to those groups, get them to join the Poor People's Campaign. And when he had a demonstration in Washington, D.C., then we would all have demonstrations at the same time all over the country. So you're talking about, rather than a demonstration in one city in Washington, D.C., you would have 25 demonstrations on that day all over the country. And that would demonstrate the kind of power he had as a leader. And in my estimation, I think that is really what caused his assassination, because that kind of power would have enabled him to run for president, which is what a lot of people thought he wanted to do. And we agreed to be a part of his Poor People's Campaign. And when we left his room and went back to our headquarters, and 30 minutes later, he was assassinated. So that's the real story of how the invaders came about and our role in Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign.
I gotta ask you, Brother John, so y'all was not kicked out the hotel? I thought that y'all had rooms at the hotel. People say y'all were kicked out the premises.
No, we were not. We had decided, there was going to be another march the next day. And that's why he met, because he wanted us to be marshals for that march. And that was part of the agreement. We would be marshals for him that day, the following day, and then he would bring us into the Poor People's Campaign. But since he wanted us to be marshals, we left to go back to my headquarters and start lining up the rest of the group. Because see, the whole group didn't come down to the Lorraine. It was only about 10 of us down there. And these were the guys that did the leadership. And so we went back to my apartment, and everybody went back to their neighborhood and started recruiting people for the march the next day. So no, we wasn't put out of the Lorraine. That rumor was started by some of Dr. King's aides. I don't like to give names because people get upset about that. But the people who were in his campaign and SCLC were the ones that started that rumor. They're the same ones that started the rumor that we were a part of Dr. King, the effort to assassinate Dr. King. That was a big rumor for about until 1978. Wow. That we were a part of that. But see, Charles Cabbage and I were subpoenaed to testify at the assassination hearing. Mm-hmm. And when we appeared at the assassination hearing, that was when the story was straightened out about why we were there and why we left the hotel and all of that.
That was back in 1978, right? Was that the hearing back in 78? Now they said Jesse Jackson did it. So Jesse Jackson was smeared. They were saying Jesse got y'all kicked out the hotel on Lorraine.
Well, he was behind that. You know, he was the one that started the rumor. Like I say, I don't like to point fingers because people get really upset. And there are a lot of people that see him as the second coming behind Dr. King. They felt he should have been able to take over the SCLC when Dr. King was assassinated. But Dr. King had chosen Reverend Abernathy to be his successor because it was he, Reverend Orange, and Reverend Hosea Williams were the only ones that were really standing with him in the Poor People's Campaign. The rest of them did not want to have anything to do with the Poor People's Campaign. They wanted him to raise money, talk to white people in the boardrooms and, you know, stuff like that. But they were the ones that were pushing the Poor People's Campaign.
Man, that's interesting. I don't know, man. You telling me stuff like, okay, Dr. King would normally stay at the Rivermont, right? The holiday. And he didn't stay at the Lorraine that much, right? At all. Did he ever stay at the Lorraine?
Well, see, the way that happened. The way that happened, when they first came to town, white people were trying to impress him. See, black people couldn't go to the Rivermont, but they were trying to impress Dr. King, so they arranged it. Local preachers and religious leaders here, they arranged for him to stay at the Rivermont. And so that's where they were the night of the riot. And the guys in the Invaders, Charles Cabbage, Calvin Taylor, Charles Ballard, O'Ree McKenzie, they all went over to the Rivermont and talked to Dr. King. I didn't go for the same reasons we're talking about now, because those guys were on the radio blaming the Invaders for the riot. And I didn't trust them. So I stayed at the apartment. But so Dr. King told him when he come back to town, he would meet with us. And when Charles Cabbage came back to the apartment, he said he knew the police gonna raid, man. So let's go down to the Lorraine and get room, because they ain't gonna, you know, they're not gonna come down there. And if they do, we got witnesses. So Charles and I went down to the Lorraine and got room. So when Dr. King's aides and things, they were still at the Rivermont. And they left the Rivermont and came to the Lorraine and got rooms once they realized we were down there, because they were trying to recruit us to, to be a part of that effort, or they were going to blackball us. I didn't buy. Charles met with him a couple of times and talked with him, but like I say, I didn't want any part of it because I didn't trust him. So when Dr. King came back to town on the 3rd, he came to the Lorraine because that's where we were. And he wanted, because that was his purpose of returning, to talk with us on the 3rd. So that's why Dr. King ended up at the Lorraine rather than at the Rivermont.
So so I'm glad you cleared that up, because it's like so much BS around this stuff. I gotta ask you, you bringing up your comrade Charles Cabbage. You brought up Ernest Withers. They say Ernest Wizard was an FBI informant, and some people suspected Charles as being one as well too. Or is that true or not?
No. Okay. Andy Young made the statement that we all talked to the FBI. We would go when we were going to have a march or a demonstration. We would go and tell the FBI what we were going to do, so because they would be that way, we would have some protection. You can check his history, and they'll tell you that he said it. See, and the other thing is, this is the South. Dr. Withers is a hero. His pictures told a story about what was happening in the South that would not have been told otherwise, because there wouldn't have been any proof. About 20 miles up the road from here, they had what they call the first tent city when sharecropping ended. In Tipton County, Fayette County, they put all the sharecroppers off their land because the cotton machine had come along, and they no longer needed Black people to pick cotton. So, and the people in Tipton County and places like that, they were trying to get registered to vote, and they didn't want them to vote. So that was their way of getting them off their land and making them non-citizens because they didn't have residence. So they couldn't register to vote. And they figured if they put them off the land, they could put them out the county. And Dr. Withers is the reason that the world knows that story, because he was the one that started documenting it with pictures and sending those pictures to the Chicago Defender, Pittsburgh Courier, and paper and Black papers in other parts of the country, so that unions and other Black politicians learned what was happening in the South and started sending aid down there. So Dr. Withers, when he took pictures of certain things like Emmett Till, he was one of the first to take a picture of Emmett Till. And that was the way that story got out. See, people who sit at home, go to church every Sunday and pray, and then during the week, they work in white folks' kitchens and things like that. They didn't like Dr. King, and they didn't like Dr. Withers, because they were people who was helping us fight the fight. And so he talked to the FBI, because a lot of the stories that he sent out, if he had not talked to the FBI to get their version of what happened, like how they found out about where the civil rights leaders were buried. That didn't come from FBI investigation. That came from informants, people who had a way of getting information that the police didn't have, because the police in Mississippi was a part of it. And so Dr. Withers would go and talk to him and trade information with him. Now they say he took money, he may have, but what he did to help Black people, to me, outweighs any of that kind of rumor or innuendos or whatever, So, and Charles, had he not been the guy that he was a hero to me, because he brought Black power to Memphis. Before Charles, it was all NAACP, and that was, and Memphis was not one of these hotbeds that did sit-ins and freedom ride. They didn't do any of that, because the leaders in Memphis were allied with the white community. They had accepted that accommodation that Kennedy worked out with the Big Six. Malcolm X talked about the Big Six and what they did. That was true. He wasn't lying. They agreed to let white people decide what accommodations they would make to Black people they would pass that agreement along to the civil rights leaders, which made them middlemen between what white people would give and try to convince black people to accept that. That was their role. And that's why Black power advocates and civil rights leaders were at odds all during that period. See, that was the real Dr. King when he started the Poor People's Campaign. It was because of that strife, that divide between civil rights leaders and Black power leaders. They didn't want us to participate in any kind of leadership role. They didn't like Stokely Carmichael or Ralph Brown. They went to the press, spread all kinds of rumors and talk crazy stuff about them. So Dr. King, on the other hand, he was different. He was talking to young white kids because they were a part of the anti-war movement. That's why when he came out against the war, they supported Dr. King, but the civil rights leaders were against that. A lot of them came out against Dr. King when he came out against the war, as well as J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover said that Dr. King was the most dangerous man in America, and he would do whatever he could to stop it. So we got this battle going on with the civil rights leaders on one side, Black power on the other, and Dr. King in between, trying to hold both sides together because he didn't want the fight in the Black community to be divided. And so that's what brings us to 1968, that divide. And when he was assassinated, everybody talked about how they were supporting Dr. King, but that was after the fact.
I know. I would think about Jesse, man. Jesse Jackson was just 26 years old. He just turned 80 on October the 8th. So he was just 26 years old when all that went down. Yeah. And people talking about his behavior, like Hosea Williams and them noted that he wasn't on the balcony, but he went up there and got the blood smudge on him. He was able to get out of Memphis and next day be on the morning show. Was Memphis shut down? Like, was it on lockdown? Was the airport on lockdown? Can you recall what was going on? How was Jesse able to get out of there?
Well, hey, like I say, I don't know, but I can tell you this.
Okay.
40 years later, when the Invaders had their 40th anniversary on April 4th, every April 4th, they had a big he and Al Sharpton came to town. They were the big leaders at that time.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that one.
And the so-called divide between the Invaders and Jesse and civil rights leaders was still ongoing. And Jesse went on the news and talked about he was going to have a confab with the Invaders to heal the breach. And I don't want to be a part of that because he got something up his sleeve. So the meeting was supposed to be that afternoon. Jesse goes on 12 o'clock news and said that he could not meet with us because he still felt we had something to do with Dr. King's assassination. 40 years afterwards, he was still running that line that the Invaders had something to do. They started to riot, and they may have been involved in the assassination.
Well, I'm gonna ask you this about the Morrell McCullough, the guy who's bending over Dr. King when he's laid out. He was an invader, right? And he became a CIA officer later on, the first Black CIA officer in history.
Well, Morrell was going to college, and he was going to University of Memphis, and he was studying. He was in criminal justice. Okay, so I don't know how the actual dynamics of how he came down and began to meet. He started coming to the rallies that they had at Claiborne Temple, and I met him, and he became associated with us. He was never what I would call an official invader. and he never really expressed interest to be an invader. And you know, the white Cadillac that sits out in front of the Lorraine, that Cadillac was owned by Miss Cornelia Crenshaw. Miss Cornelia Crenshaw was an old time. She was a part of black politics when during the Crump administration. That was in the 30s and 40s. And she knew white people that knew stuff, you know, because they were a part of the Crump machine. And she maintained all of her connections. So when I would go down to meet to the rallies, she told me about Ernest, Dr. Ernest Withers, and the suspicion that he was meeting with the talking to the police. She also told me Morrell was suspected of being an informant. But she also told me that the COM committee, which was Jesse Elps, Maxine Smith, Jesse Turner, all of those, Reverend H. Ralph Jackson, he said they were meeting with Lowe every night after we had a sanitation rally at Claiborne Temple. Every night we'd meet. When the rally was over, they would go meet with Lowe. Now, I wasn't in any of these meetings, but it fit the pattern because they were the ones that were carrying water for Lowe at the union meeting. They were the ones trying to talk the workers into going back to work. They were the ones that were giving the sanitation workers updates on what Lowe was willing to accept if the workers would go back to, if the sanitation workers would come back to the job, what Lowe would concede. So this is why I say talking to the police, talking to the FBI, talking to, you know, white folks, the mayor, it was a part of the process, the political process. So to put a negative connotation on one person and not on the other, I don't take part in those kinds of things, you know.
Oh, that's good to heighten the contradictions. I mean, Ernest Withers was one of the first black police officers in Memphis modern history, right? One of the first, one of the five. Oh, the first eight. Okay.
Yeah, it was 8 of them. And the reason Dr. Withers was able to get in on the as one of the first 8 is the guy that Crump wanted was not able to show up for that photo they took. So Ernest was able to get into it as one of the 8 because he was available.
Wow.
But he really wanted to be a photographer. And that was what he was trying to do. See, his son was an invader, Wendell. He was an invader. And I go down and talk to Doc. Charles was one of his favorite people. And he talked to Charles. That's why he knew so much about the invader, because we talked to him. And a lot of what got into the record as a part of the 78 hearings. Okay. But see, and Charles and I, we were the only 2 Black Power advocates that testified at that trial. And while we were there, they subpoenaed us, paid for our way flight to Washington, D.C. and back to Memphis. And for the hotel that we stayed in for the 3 days that we were there. And one of the investigators on that, on the staff, his name was Kenneth Wade. We were in the Air Force together in Phoenix, Arizona. And, you know, when I saw him, he saw me, of course. We had that, hey, man, what's up? So he told me a lot of stuff about what was going on in the committee, the stuff they had found out about J. Edgar Hoover, and how they thought that the committee was going to really release all that information to the public so that people could see what kind of guy J. Edgar Hoover actually was. But that's why the House voted to lock it down. See, what they did, they put it on lockdown and they told the public what was in it. The public has never really been able to see what was in that file. You know, so, but from what he told me, there was no doubt that the federal government was involved in the assassination. You know, and that's why I think they put it on lockdown. And you can, there's one in writing the 400 and doing the Invaders documentary. We got a hold of one of the files. It's called the Arkin file, the Arkin report. And Arkin was a Memphis policeman. He was the one in charge of putting together a report of what the Memphis police was doing, their investigation of the assassination. And in that report, he tells you all about the different federal investigation operations that were working against Dr. King. There were 4 of them. There was the COINTELPRO. There was one called the Ghetto. It was Ghetto Investigating Operation. And then there was Johnson even ran one out of the White House. All of these groups were collecting information on Dr. King. They were spreading lies. It was about, their disinformation campaign that they carried out to keep people from joining the campaign. And it's all right there in the Arkin report. For anybody that could get a copy of that, I got a copy at home in my file. And I talked about that in the 400.
It's interesting. They came out the other day that the Biden administration won't still release the Kennedy files that should have been released several years ago. And they got the Dr. King files they're going to release allegedly in 2027. They're really trying to do a smear campaign on Dr. King's legacy. I was just thinking about what's your take on that? Like all the stuff about him maybe like stepping out on Coretta and all the other stuff that he did allegedly.
Well, even if he did it, even if he stepped out on Coretta, that was not, to me, that was not relevant. But the reason they're going to release it in 2027 is because they voted first to seal it for 25 years. And the 25th year ended in 2003. And George Bush Jr. voted to seal it for another 25 years. And if that seal will be up in 2027. So they're not doing us any favor. And the only way it won't come out is the Congress has to, the House of Representatives has to vote to seal it again. And they don't want to take responsibility for sealing it. But if you're going to open it in 2027, you could vote to open it today. Because that's all it takes. A vote of the House of Representatives, a majority vote in the House of Representatives today can open the files. But
but like the JFK thing, they tell me they're not going to open the file because of COVID. I said, they don't make any sense to me. Yeah, people still alive that they trying to protect still.
Well, it's like the January 6th riot in the Capitol. Everything they're going through right now is to do what they did with Dr. King's assassination. They are trying to protect the role the government played. See, the government played, there are people in the government that facilitated January 6th. And because you can't do anything like that and get no response. These people had attacked the Capitol for 4 hours before anything happened. Plus, they were not even ready. Had that been black people, they would have had the whole Capitol on lockdown. Not only would they had it on lockdown, there would have been dead bodies in the street. So all of that to me is just a cover up to keep the federal government from looking like what it really was and the role it really played in not only Dr. King's assassination or the Kennedy's assassination, but in the January 6th riot or insurrection, because that's what it was, an insurrection. And that's the only way you can look at it.
You know, on December 8th, 1999, in the U.S. Civil Court in Memphis, the government was found guilty of being involved in elements of the government complicit in the King assassination. And then, like, according to Judge Joe Brown and other sources, the gun that allegedly killed Dr. King could be traced back to the FBI in terms of chain of possession. How come that's not common knowledge?
I wouldn't doubt that. I've been either a part of or approached by people doing different one of these investigations that have resulted. And I personally have always felt, because see, in the Arkin report, they mentioned two names, Floyd Newsom and Ed Reddick. Floyd Newsom was a fireman. He was the first Black fireman. He was stationed in that firehouse. And when I did a 1 to 5 years in Nashville in the penitentiary, when I finished that penitentiary sentence, I still had 11 months and 29 days to serve at the Shelby County Penal Farm. While I was out there, I became a part of a rehabilitation program. And one of the people that was hired to work in that program was Floyd Newsom. And Floyd knew me as an invader. And he told me the day that before the assassination, that the U.S. Army took over that fire station. They had spotters up there, radio equipment, and everything. That's where the observation station was. The day of the assassination, he was ordered not to come back to work. One of the people that manned that observation post was Ed Reddick. Ed Reddick had been there keeping a log on the activity around the Lorraine Motel. This is what messed up Jesse Jackson's them claim, because he documented the invaders were there. And the day of the assassination, the log began that morning, and he kept an hourly record all the way to 4 o'clock. At 4 o'clock, he was ordered to go back to the downtown headquarters. He was ordered out of the fire station and back downtown to police headquarters. And they sent another guy down to take his place. That the record ends at 4 o'clock, and it doesn't pick up again until 6:10. So there's nothing in the record. But during that 4 o'clock, that's when the invaders meeting took place with Dr. King. And the report doesn't pick up again until after we left the hotel, going back to our headquarters.
I had a chance to interview Ed Reddick, I think back in 2008. It was interesting. He's passed on now, but it was interesting to talk about some of that stuff. I gotta ask you this too, because you know Reverend Billy Cowles, right? He made this documentary saying he spent the last hour with Dr. King. You know, they was making preacher jokes, and the food wasn't ready, but his wife said the food was ready. What do you think about that story about Billy Cowles would tell for years and years, that he was in the room with Dr. King for a whole hour, the last hour of Dr. King's life? And y'all met with Dr. King, and Ralph Abernathy said there was some other thing going on. There was no hour meeting with Billy Cowles in his book.
It wasn't. It wasn't.
Get away with that.
See, we left about 30 minutes before he was assassinated.
Right.
It's about a 20-minute bus ride from that fire station to my apartment. See, when I got off the bus, walked to my apartment, went in the house, turned on the TV, Walter Cronkite was making his famous announcement of Dr. King's assassination. That was about 25 minutes. Okay. So he would have had to be there while we were there. We started meeting with Dr. King about 4:30, a little before. And we talked about an hour and a half. So that would have made it about, I'd say generously, we left about 5:30, left Dr. King's room between 5:30 and 5:45.
Wow.
Billy Kyles was not there. There was no one in that meeting with us and Dr. King. It was just Charles Cabbage, myself, and Dr. King. Charles and I sit on one bed because it's a double. And Dr. King sit on the other bed. He was the only one in the room. And we talked for at least an hour, maybe a little longer. Nobody was keeping up with time for as it go. But I like you, I've always been mystified by that so-called hour meeting. And from what I knew, Jesse was the one that called Dr. King to the banister. And he was down on the ground. And Dr. King came out of the room. Kyle, the story I got, they had just arrived because they were late getting there because, as they said, the food wasn't ready and all of that. And he was supposed to pick Dr. King up and take him someplace. And so he can say an hour, but to me, the timeline is about 15 minutes at the most.
Right. Was Dr. King, brother A.D. King, there as well?
He wasn't in the room.
But was he in Memphis at the time of Dr. King's death?
I never met him.
Okay. See, I mean, like, you read so many stories. I don't know what to believe. I mean, you were primary source though. You actually was there, like you said. Cal wasn't there for no hour.
He wasn't there when we left.
Premises. Y'all wasn't kicked off the premises like they said. Jesse Jackson told y'all that. Okay. So I mean, all this stuff been going around for years though. Like this stuff, this is the narrative.
Right. There's a story that Hosea Williams that come up to the room and told us we had to leave and all of that. See, but they wasn't paying our bill. We were there when they came to the hotel.
And I mean, actually, like, was the Lorraine like on a whole track or something? I mean, was Lorraine back in 6 days? Was it on the whole track?
Well, Lorraine was it was the upper hotel. Okay. Now, there were a couple of other hotels that, where that took place. One of the hotels was the Mitchell Hotel. That was owned by Sunbeam Mitchell. Right. And it was a regular hotel. It was on Beale Street in Hernando above the Pantaz drugstore, you know. And like I said, the reason they were at the Lorraine is because we were there. See, we took rooms there the night of the riot because we knew the police was going to come by and raid my apartment.
It was March 28th, right? When they killed Larry Payne too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. See, so we did that because Cornelia Crenshaw had warned us. She told us the day of the riot not to go because she had received information that if anything went wrong, the invaders would be blamed. And she advised us not to come. Kobe Smith, Dr. Kobe Smith now.
You must have been reading my name, man. I mean, my mind. I'm about to ask you about Dr. Kobe Smith. Go ahead.
Well, Dr. Kobe Smith had a girlfriend that was dating a policeman. And she told him because she saw she said he had pictures of he and Charles in his wallet. And she, how women go through your shit, I believe that. She was going through his billfold and saw the two pictures. Yeah. And she wanted to know why he had them. And he told her that they had been given orders that on the day of the march, they were to keep eyes on Kobe and Charles. And if anything went wrong, they were to shoot him on sight.
Now, but imagine that Dr. Kobe Smith, he did an interview back then, act like that Dr. King was not welcome by the invaders or people in Memphis to come participate in the sanitation workers strike. You remember that interview I'm talking about when he was a young guy?
I remember that. And I'll say this in Kobe's defense. He was like me. I was so pissed off at the insinuation that we had something to do with the riot, that we had caused the riot, that I didn't want to even talk to, and I said some things then about SCLC and and the civil rights leaders because I was pissed. But it was not the people. We were not welcome. See, we were all pissed off because when we first started going down and talking to people in the sanitation strike, there was a white minister that was Dr. H. Ralph Jackson's assistant pastor. His name was Blackburn.
Okay.
And Reverend Blackburn, he was the only one that would even talk to us. And he had arranged to get us into one of the strategy meetings so we could be a part of the strategy. And they got pissed and put us out. They got pissed and put us out. And so that's why we wasn't a part of any of the strategy. And they kind of blackballed Reverend Blackburn from being a part of anything. So, this is, you got to remember, I was 25 at the time.
Y'all was a young guy.
Kobe was maybe a year. I think Kobe's a year older than I am. Charles, he's a year younger than I am. So
I mean, Jesse was 26. Like I said, Jesse Jackson was about 26 around that time.
Yeah, so we all mad, and so young men will express themselves in ways that older folks objected to, and I was good at that because I like pissing them off. I got up and pointed my finger at Maxine and called her a sellout right in the meeting and told her, "You trying to sell these people out."
I heard some things about Ben Hooks too, but I mean, like all these folks got streets and buildings named after them. It kind of like, okay, it's interesting.
That's why anybody that really worked to help poor people, they don't have anything named after them.
Right.
And their names are denigrated in every way. And that's why I think they are so down on Dr. Withers. Because he was not accepted in their circle. Cornelia Crenshaw, she was not accepted in their circle.
I heard that they broke into her home after she died and stole all those files she had, all the information she had on.
Yes, they did.
Powerful people.
They did. And see, they're the ones that the press gives credit, where credit is not due, and things of that nature. So, the thing about this whole period right here, young people, Black Lives Matter, they changed the world. There's never been a time where things that Black people were involved in, the larger world embraced. At the time when George Floyd was murdered, I was just basically writing on the 400. I wasn't involved in any activity because I couldn't trust anybody. Because everybody was vying to get their face on TV, and you can attest to the fact that it was only after the Black Lives Matter protests really began and gained strength that people like Al Sharpton started showing up and speaking on the mic. At one point, they literally had taken over the mic. They were the ones doing all the talking. I started writing. I started doing a weekly post to young people to get them to understand that that's the same thing that happened to us.
Mm-hmm.
The old civil rights leaders took over the means of communicating. They told they wanted young people to get behind them, let them do the leading, and I saw that happening all over again. But see, Black Lives Matter, they are the ones that deserve all the credit, if any credit is given, for what is happening right now today. There were hundreds of thousands of people in the streets because of them. Up until then, like I said earlier, that 50,000 people we put on Beale Street, that was the largest Black demonstration in this country up until Black Lives Matter started protesting George Floyd and other police murders. Mm-hmm. We owe Black Lives Matter a debt of gratitude. I don't care what anybody says. They have earned a position of leadership. There were people in New Zealand, New Zealand, that were having Black Lives Matter marches. I don't care who that, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, I don't care what name you pull up. Can't match that. They can't touch that. And I think young people today need to understand that they have the power and they need to exercise that power every way they can. See, 2022 is young people's year. Why? Because 18-year-old can vote. That means a junior in high school controls the fate of people like that's a Freudian slip. Mitch McConnell. Mm-hmm. An 18-year-old, the largest demographic in this country right now is 18 to 35. Mm-hmm. These are the people who, if they come out to the polls, they work in the next coming election, they are going to elect whoever it is. Young people have the power to determine the leadership in America for the next 20 years. All they got to do is go to the poll. See, the older generation, which is 35 until infinity, mm-hmm. They are no longer the majority. That's why those the Christian cinemas and Joe Manchin's are doing as much as they can to kill the Biden administration's infrastructure bill. Why? Because it talks about free education, junior college, child care. These young people need child care so they can go to work. Without without child care, they can't go to work. You know, those are the things that the progressives are pushing because it's about them. Mm. And what they're talking about is about what old people need. I'm not against old people because I'm one of them. Right. I'm 78. But hell, if I got Social Security, I got, disability pay and things like that. Mm-hmm. But these young people, we need to give them all the support we can because they are the future. This is their world. Like that's why I call it from slavery to hip hop. This is a hip hop world. Our children, grandchildren, they're the ones that need the assistance. They're the ones that need to have access to government. They don't need to wait till they're 45 to get into politics. They need to be able to run when they're 21, 22, like we did Teddy Withers. We got Teddy Withers elected right here in Memphis as the youngest legislator in the history of Tennessee. Mm. And we beat a white man. He was the leader of the labor unions in the state of Tennessee. He had been in the legislature 12 years, and we beat him with a newcomer. That was Dr. Will's son. Mm. I ran his campaign.
Wow.
And we used the Party Brothers and the Men of Progress from Lemoyne and another little group called the Big Brother Junior Achievers. They were located up on Latham and McLemore. That was his campaign. We didn't have any major endorsements. The Democratic Party wouldn't, all the black people were supporting Tommy Powell. So I know what young people can do if they're campaigned to, and you talk to them. So
I gotta ask you.
No, I wouldn't waste.
I'm gonna ask you, like, do you? I know it's another Dr. King thing. I'm just, I got you on here because I mean, you like a primary source. Do you believe that Dr. King was actually killed at St. Joseph's Hospital? That's what the theory had been coming out by Dr. William Pepper and other people, claiming that he was smothered to death at St. Joseph's.
Well, I put it like this. I don't discount that because everything I've heard came from the same kind of sources. There was no black people, in that from the time he was taken from the balcony of the Lorraine till the time he was pronounced dead. I accept anything that is, given about what happened to him, especially if it's something that counters the story that James Earl Ray was the only one involved in it. See, that's where it starts with me. That's why I know it's a lie. I start with that lie because you had U.S. Army intelligence in town. You got FBI all over the place. And how can a poor ass white boy do all the things that James Earl Ray supposedly did just getting out of prison?
He escaped from prison, actually. He was on the run for 2 years.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And got a passport.
You can go to Russia, come back, and hook up. Come on now.
It's like James, like you said, Lee Harvey Oswald was just 24, but he's able to denounce his citizenship and come back with no problem. And people don't see a problem with this type of stuff. I don't think people really deep thinking like that. But what about Katie Sexton? You think she was killed at St. Joseph? Do you know Katie Sexton?
No, I don't.
It was an activist, I think it's Sexton. Then she got a community center name out there in North Memphis. Katie Sexton. She was.
I didn't know her.
But you know of her? Do you ever hear of her name? Katie Sexton. They said she died at St. Joseph. She said they're gonna kill her. I know her daughter Annie Yates. She's a
I know Annie. I know.
Yeah, her mom was Katie Sexton, the civil rights activist, and she got killed allegedly at St. Joseph's. Allegedly.
Hey, like I say, I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay.
The reason I say that is I went to the penitentiary for 5 years and did 1129 at the penal farm on on 2 ex post facto laws.
Okay. What's that? Okay.
The incident I was arrested for took place on May 25th. In July, the state of Tennessee legislature met and they passed a lot of laws that had to do with rioting. 2 of those laws was participating in a riot and trespassing in a school. A grand jury met in August and indicted me on those 2 laws. Those are the laws that I went to the penitentiary on. The laws were passed 2 months after the incident.
Interesting.
And another individual that people get all excited about around is Walter Bailey. Walter was a great guy and all of that. But Walter was my lawyer up until the week before I went to trial. And he told me he could not defend me because he would have a conflict of interest. And he got up off of my case and I had to use a public defender, a white guy. And he refused to bring up the ex post facto because they were not even supposed to indict me. He refused to bring it up. So I believe anything people tell me about the so-called justice system or healthcare system in Memphis, because they all have done things that I believe because of what they've done to me. So,
I mean, I know, Brother John, you told me a story. It's like I'm trying to wrap my mind around it still about your situation where you actually was somebody robbed you of millions of dollars.
Well, I was a student at University of Memphis, and I'm a psychologist. I graduated the top student in psychology. And the top students get this award called the Milton C. Addington Award. They gave me the award and $300 and interest into the graduate psychology program at Memphis State. My wife and I, we wrote a grant and filed it with for assistance from the National Science Foundation. The National Science Foundation gave me $80,000 to go to graduate school. I was the only Black student in psychology as a graduate student. I was the only Black student as an undergrad or graduate student. There were no Black professors, so I had to depend upon the white professors to help me develop my grant. And I got it working with one professor, and he wouldn't help me, so I couldn't get another professor to help me. So I went over to special education and talked to the department head. She wanted to know what was I, do you have anything in writing? So I did the honors thesis on what was called fetal alcohol syndrome. At that time, there was nobody doing real research on fetal alcohol. And that's what the National Science Foundation gave me the $80,000 for, because nobody was studying it.
Wow.
I showed her my honors thesis. She looked at it and looked at me and read and looked at me. Her eyes got bigger. And, I'm like, and then she said, well, can you let me keep this? Because I don't have time to read all this right now. I'll get back with you in a couple of weeks. I'm dumb, I'm a Cottonfield nigga, So okay, yeah, all right, fine. I leave it with her. I don't hear anything for 2-3 weeks. So when I go back over looking for her, they tell me she's on sabbatical. And they can't give me any information about her or anything. I go back over to the psychology department. I talk to the head of the psychology department and other professors, because they knew it was my thesis, and without that, I can't get a master's degree. So I needed someone to help me. Nobody would help. About 3 weeks later, there was a headline in the Memphis Press Senator. Memphis State professor gets $3.5 million to study fetal alcohol syndrome. Even that didn't help, because now it's, well, she didn't steal it from you, and you ought to work with her. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Wow.
So that's when I left, going to Atlanta. I could have stayed and spent the rest of my life fighting over that. But I had a young family and a wonderful wife. And so I walked away. My grandfather taught me that if there's no wind, you might as well cut and cut clean. And that's what I did. But thank God I left, because I've had a wonderful life. I had a wonderful wife. She was going to she was in graduate school at Memphis State also. She discovered her thesis became the foundation for all this, the work they do on black, white, medium family income, the disparities in black, white income.
Yeah.
He was the one that developed that level of research. She created a mathematical formula that enabled you to compare the two and get that difference. Because see, if everybody's equal, as they say, then your median family income and unemployment would be at zero, because we all equal.
Right.
But there's a variance there. And she was able to plot that variance. And that was the first mathematical formula that showed that. That's why they have so much problems now, because the numbers show it. But before her, there were no numbers. It was all about what people said.
Did she get the proper credit for inventing that? Did she get proper credit for that?
Well, when I left, she was going to school to get her doctorate. She was about 6 months from getting her doctorate. And when I left, she said, I can't stay here with these people. If they did you like that, they're going to do me like that somehow. So she, as far as her theory, she got credit because she published it. And she published it in the Mid-South Journal of Economics. So,
did she ever get her doctorate though? Did she go back to school to get her doctorate?
No, she never got her doctorate. She was like me. She was done with all of that. I'm glad I didn't stay to get mine, because if I did, I wouldn't have wrote the 400.
Yeah, I mean, everything has a reason.
That's the most important thing, because until the 400, we didn't have a story that chased our development as a people from before the transatlantic slave trade until today. See, to me, that's more important than anything, because young people, like I said, I wrote it for high school students and young college students. They need to know how not only how we got here, but what we've been able to do since we've been here. We have at our disposal a way of telling our story, and white people can't say it's speculation. So to me, that's more important than anything.
I'm gonna ask you this. I gotta ask you this before I let you go. I know I got my book now. They say it's at Advanced Auto waiting for me. I look forward to reading your book. So I got the show. I gotta go to Advanced Auto to get your book, but it's necessary. It should be part of the curriculums. I mean, you made it a course book. You wrote it like a course book, it sounds like. But I gotta ask you this: what about this new movement that says that black folks didn't come on the boats? We the Native Americans. We the real Indians. What's your take on that whole movement now?
I'll say this about it. When I read it in a book, like the 400, I'll consider it. But as long as it's word of mouth and you're talking about stuff that I can't verify and that I got to accept your word, and as far as what we know about artifacts and things like that, I don't see any. If you could show me some to support that, then I would consider it. But at this point, I don't have any confidence that what they're saying is that only a few of us came from Africa.
I mean, but, through the slave trade, of course.
Right. Yeah. So they say the transatlantic slave. But now we can verify the transatlantic slave trade. It's you go to Oxford's library, you go to France, they got whole libraries on it. So
well, they'll tell you where the slave ships at though. Where the slave ships. See, that's the thing. They go to where the slave ships at.
They were made out of wood.
I was saying this, people, everybody got their point, but I think I believe some of us, it was a great jazz master named Randy Weston, and I became friends with him towards the end of his life. He passed away back in 2018, but he probably only one person in the history of the world that could claim like Langston Hughes and Thelonious Monk as his two mentors. I call them Jagnas. But he said his dad was from Panama, his mom was from Virginia. They were both Garveyites. And he tell me he married a Senegalese woman. He said, Ron, America is Africa. That's what he would tell me. America is Africa.
Well, like I say, I've read about Marcus Garvey. And for everything I've read about Marcus Garvey, he felt about it like I did. That home was Africa.
He never been to Africa, though. That's a unique thing about Marcus.
I haven't either.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but even like he's from, I just think it's interesting because Marcus, we made him who he is. American black made Marcus Garvey, not Jamaicans. Even though he's Jamaican, he had to come here to get made by American blacks. Like Booker T. Washington was his pen pal. A. Philip Randolph gave him his first speaking engagement here. But Ho Chi Minh of the Vietnamese resistance, Ho Chi Minh, he used to come to America to listen to Marcus Garvey speak, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, Marcus Garvey really was one of the most dynamic individuals. I don't care where he came from. See, we can always nitpick about specific little things.
Right.
But Marcus Garvey taught Black people that if I can do it, you can do it too. And he did some amazing things. And because he did, before him, we didn't believe we could do certain things as people. He brought Black people together in a way that nobody else had. People were working and sending him pennies and dimes to be a part of what he was doing. And had the government, see, what most people don't realize is that J. Edgar Hoover is responsible for Marcus Garvey being deported. And they deported Marcus Garvey for a $25 check. $25. And not only did they deport him, they destroyed the UNIA. Now, white folks go to jail all the time for embezzling money, but they don't destroy their companies.
You're right.
They don't take everything that they helped create, but that's what they did with Marcus Garvey. See, so it wasn't about Marcus Garvey. It was about what Marcus Garvey was doing. He was giving Black people confidence that they could do things that white people had convinced them they couldn't. And like Dr. King, he was convincing Black people, Malcolm X, also, the people that convinced Black people that they can do things that white people said they can't, something always happened to them.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Smith, I just gotta call you Dr. Smith now since all this information you drop in there. You got the pedigree and the credentials. I want to thank you for spending. I can't believe it's been almost 2 hours, but thank you for spending this time just dispensing wisdom. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at Manassas. I think the kids gonna really enjoy what you have to offer. But you have any parting words? And y'all gonna get this book. I've been posting it. Y'all get this book at Amazon, The 400 from Slavery to Hip Hop, or at Barnes and Noble. I ordered from Barnes and Noble and Amazon, but the Barnes and Noble came more quickly. I'm still waiting on the Amazon, but I'm about to pick that up from the Advanced Auto Parts about 4 miles away from here. But do you have any parting words or jewels or gems you want to drop some more? I think we just robbing the bank with you. You dropping so much money around here. We just robbing the bank.
I'd like to thank you for giving me, for using your platform to reach out and talk to people who really looking for a way or a means of understanding some of all this confusion that's flowing. And like you, I would advise them to get the 400 and read it.
Yeah.
And if once they do that, they'll be able to understand a lot of this. They'll be able to figure out their role in going forward. And I talk directly to young people. because young people are our future. And I'll see you in the morning at Manassas.
Yes, sir. Well, in the words of Great Duke Ellington, we love you madly, and you keep on producing and pushing.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. And thank you, family, for tuning in to us. Y'all can catch this in the archives at WWII TV on YouTube. And this is definitely this day number 2 of the Jimmy Lunsford Jamboree Festival. And y'all say we didn't talk about Jimmy Lunsford, but yeah, we did, because Jimmy Lunsford was all about self-determination and defining your own terms of success and living by your own code. And we need that more so than ever, excuse me. And Black masculinity matters. You know what I'm saying? We need Black males to decide to be Black men and be willing to pay that cost, because our people cannot move forward without Black masculinity. When Dr. King was a man, Malcolm was a man, Mega was a man, and Marcus was a man. These were men that were willing to pay the ultimate cost for the investment of their people. Never forget those lessons. Thank you all once again. If you like the words from Burl Lee, please spread the word. WWII TV, YouTube. You can support the cause. Cash App, $ R2C2H2. You can Google Pay, PayPal, or Venmo, R2C2H2 @gmail.com. Zelle. Then Venmo is at R2C2H2. You can buy art of his art. I got this portrait I did of Jimmy Lunsford. And also you can wear it. You can wear the art as well too. This is actually Albert Young. You ever heard of Second Lieutenant Albert Young, Brother John?
No, I haven't.
He's from Memphis. He was like one of the Tuskegee Airmen. He got killed over in the Czech Republic. See, this is the crazy thing about this is the sad thing about Memphis. He's a national hero in the Czech Republic. He was like in his early 20s, right? And we try to reach out to the organizer because they just made a new monument to him. He was originally buried in the Czech Republic. His plane crashed and they thought he was a hero. He was a hero. And then they moved his remains to the American cemetery in France. But the Czech Republic, they had created a new monument for him. And they wanted people from America to come over and pay their respects, like because he's a hero. Yeah. And it was like Memphis in May. We reached out to Memphis in May because they did it, and we told Memphis in May organizers about it, and they didn't do nothing because they under the Czech Republic that year, and they didn't think of honoring this Black man from Memphis who died for the Czech Republic during World War II. The people over there said y'all don't think he's a hero. I said it's not that. This is called racism over here. But I've been saying this: Memphis has contributed so much to America and to the world, but the Memphians don't know it.
Yes.
And then like Black Memphians at that. So I think I'm gonna read this book, The 400, and also I look forward to working with you some more. Like you said, tomorrow, I know the best is yet to come. You take care of yourself, and like Marcus said, look for me in the whirlwind.
All right.
All right, right on.
Thank you.
Thank you.